Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'm continuing with my discussion with regard to the tragic uh, murder by the former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax of his late wife, the accomplished Dr. Serena Fairfax. Now, there's been all sorts of speculation, right, regarding his mental health, how mental health. Uh, Mental illness may have contributed um, to his wild, uh, you know, wild, savage behavior, murderous, heinous conduct. From everything that I've researched, I don't see any indication that he was formally diagnosed with anything, with any mental illness. Although there are indications that he suffered a mental health crisis in November, sorry, in 2022, and he might have been hospitalized. I don't know how accurate that information is. It's something I saw on the internet, but and there's a challenge there. Virginia is one of those states, rare states, where saying somebody has a mental illness could actually end up become, leading to a criminal charge. So I guess that was why there was that uh, muteness, right? There's that reticence regarding his mental health status when he was living, but it was clear that he was abusing alcohol. He was abusing alcohol, right? And what many people don't realize in America is that alcohol abuse, right? Alcohol abuse can actually lead to mental illness, right? Alcohol abuse can trigger mental illness, very severe mental illness, and psychotic behavior, similar to schizophrenia. Apparently, there's actually a condition called alcohol induced psychotic disorder. That's where somebody who consumes alcohol heavily starts to hallucinate. They hear voices, they hallucinate, they're paranoid. They suffer conditions that mimic schizophrenia, right? Although it's temporary, but by the way, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a qualified physician. The data that I'm reviewing, the information I'm reviewing is from the website of the National Institutes of Health, various sources, and National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, right? So apparently, there's a condition called alcohol-induced psychotic disorder, right? In which, let me see, I can actually pull it up. Sorry, just give me a moment. Yeah. Yeah. Says excessive alcohol consumption or withdrawal can cause psychosis, a condition known as alcohol induced psychotic disorder, AIPD. It is characterized by hallucinations, delusions, and severe confusion, often emerging during acute intoxication or after abruptly stopping long term heavy drinking, right? Symptoms can last from 48 hours up to 6 months and require medical intervention, right? So now, court documents indicate that he was abusing alcohol heavily, and that he was using his home as his for his law office practice, right? And it is indicated that there are indications that his office was littered, filled with empty bottles of wine, right? Several empty bottles of wine. And in court documents indicate that he was a raging alcoholic, right? So, um, and here's health information saying that, well, that actually alcohol can cause, mental health conditions that mimic schizophrenia, right? It mimics schizophrenia. Um, Says the difference from uh, alcohol induced psychotic disorder and schizophrenia is while symptoms are similar, AIPD, that's alcohol induced psychotic disorder, is typically temporary, often resolving with abstinence and treatment, unlike chronic long term schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a very serious mental disorder. So here is health information saying that, well, that excessive consumption of alcohol can actually lead to a condition that mimics schizophrenia, right? So this is terrible. We know apart from alcohol, Americans consume alcohol at a very high rate. Over 84 to 86% of Americans, adult Americans, consume alcohol. 84 to that's the majority of alcohol of Americans. So they are susceptible to these psychotic conditions that mimic schizophrenia, right? This is the takeaway. Um, Now, we know that Americans abuse other drugs as well, such as cannabis, right? Cannabis, also called Indian hemp or marijuana. Now, cannabis I knew has there's also a cannabis induced psychotic disorder as well, right? Cannabis, in fact, and let me read that. I pulled that up. Um, Cannabis, in fact, can excessive use of cannabis can actually excessive use of cannabis can actually um, uh, cause one to become permanently schizophrenic, right? Uh, they say half of cannabis users who experience psychosis and who have to um, suffer medical intervention, hospitalization as a result of their excessive use of their use of cannabis. Um, it is there are indications that half of them, at least half of them, are eventually converted to a full blown diagnosis of schizophrenia within years of use. And especially for people who start using cannabis at a very young age, before they're 16, when the brain is not yet well developed. When you're coming, it's routine when I'm passing through the metro stations, DC, the DMV area, DC, Maryland. Um, it's common to actually find underage kids, boys, girls, smoking cannabis. I remember once I tried to intervene and I thought, there are these black American elderly people. And I thought, okay, they'd reprimand these kids. They couldn't have been more than 12 years old. They were smoking cannabis at the station, at the train station, right, at the metro. And you know, and I was looking to these elderly people, Black Americans, to intervene, and like they didn't care. Nobody cared. So this is what we're experiencing in America right now. Kids using cannabis, and obviously they're going to become crazy. They're going to become start suffering from schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, mental illness. Yes, these are things that heritable. You could, inherit them, genetic, but drugs can induce them as well. So people who weren't genetically predisposed, if they abuse drugs, especially at a young age, then they will develop these symptoms. Then they will actually develop a severe mental illness like schizophrenia, which happens with the abuse of cannabis. It can also happen with the abuse of alcohol as well. This is what many people don't talk about. People become binge drinkers when they get into college. American colleges abuse alcohol. Now, the rates are here. I drew up the stats from, and that's what I wanted to just do today. The stats here, and they're atrocious, and that's what's causing the severe mental health crisis in America, right? So it's not something that's not controllable. It's actually self induced. It's Americans who are choosing to abuse drugs. I know, yes, we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, prohibition. We've gone through prohibition with the 18th Amendment, and that only had the blowback of, it created the mafia, right? It created the mafia, organized crime. There was more violence, right? But at the same time, um, this is a addicted nation, right? And the drug addiction is contributing to psychosis, to crazy behavior, severe mental illness, and that only leads to crime, like the crazy crimes, murders that occurred this weekend, the murder that occurred with the Fairfax home. Uh, Justin Fairfax was severely abusing alcohol, and we can see that alcoholism can actually leads to psychotic behavior, behavior and hallucinations and symptoms that actually mimic schizophrenia, right? So this is not something we should dismiss, but now I'm going to go into the statistics anyway, the data. So it says that okay, regarding alcohol use, approximately 84.1 to 86% of African Americans 18 plus, sorry, not African Americans, American adults, I apologize. So 84.1% to 86% of American adults 18 plus report having consumed alcohol at some point in their lifetime. Past year usage, around 67.1 of adults report drinking in the past year. Current usage as of July 2025, this is according to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics. 54% of US adults reported currently drinking alcohol. Now, with respect to drug use, illicit drugs like marijuana and stuff like that, approximately 51.2% of people aged 12 and older have used illicit drugs at least once. Lifetime drug types, as of, oh, this is old data though, as of 2008, 42.6% of people over 12 reported having ever used marijuana. 7.2% of Americans have used cocaine. 1.3% have used heroin. So the drug use of choice is alcohol, right? Roughly 86% of Americans. But alcoholism also induces symptoms that are psychotic symptoms, you know similar to schizophrenia. So we shouldn't overlook that. Um, so in 2024, roughly 24.9% people 12 and older, and Americans start using illicit drugs like marijuana at a very young age, unfortunately. So between 12 and older, used illegal drugs as of 2024. Current usage, 16.8% of Americans 12 and over used drugs in the last month. This was a 2023 data, right? So 16.8%. That's hard drugs or marijuana and over. Substance use disorders, approximately 32.8% adults over the age of 18 have a substance use disorder or any mental illness. Any mental illness is called AMI. So that's 32.8%. So basically, one out of every three Americans suffers from a substance use disorder or any mental illness, any form of mental illness. That's one out of three people. So you see, yeah, the mental health of Americans is in crisis right now. Um, I'm just put it out there. I don't drink. I don't take alcohol. So I guess I'm a hmm. um combined use. Now 60% of US population is considered to be actively using some form of substance. More than 60%, over 60%, actively uses some form of substance, alcohol, tobacco, or drugs. So over 60%. Young adults, drug use is highest among adults aged 18 to 25, with 39% reporting use of hard drugs in the past month. 39%. So between that age, 18 to 25, That's when drug use is highest amongst Americans, about 39%. So those are the stats, and it's pretty bad. And again, Indian hemp, and there are other harder drugs, right? Like LSD is worse, cocaine. I have never used any of these, by the way. Um, and these are drugs that young people experiment with. Indian hemp cannabis can cause psychosis. Research indicates it is a significant risk factor for both acute psychotic episodes and the long term development of chronic disorders like schizophrenia. That's what they say is cannabis. So, for people who like to use cannabis, right? Um, Types of psychotic reactions: acute transient psychosis, occurs shortly after use, right? Shortly after use of cannabis, and typically resolves as the drug wears off, usually within hours to days. Symptoms include hallucinations, paranoia, and delusions. Cannabis induced psychotic disorder, a formal diagnosis where psychotic symptoms last longer than the period of intoxication, sometimes requiring hospitalization. Chronic psychotic disorders, heavy use, particularly during adolescence, is linked to significantly higher risk of developing persistent conditions like schizophrenia later in life. So there you have it. Drug use is causing severe mental illness in America. So people maybe not even genetically predisposed to mental illness just because they've been experimenting or abusing drugs heavily. It will induce severe mental illness like schizophrenia later on. And schizophrenia is like the dangerous, very, very dangerous mental illness. That's basically being crazy, right? Um, and what is bizarre and many Americans are not acknowledging is that alcohol consumption also can lead to schizophrenia like symptoms, right? Uh, Conditions that mimic schizophrenia, and this might have been something that was partly responsible for Justin Fairfax' uh, unfortunate but reprehensible uh, actions on April the 16th, 2026. So, not to give, the benefit of him, the benefit of the doubt, many people, initially my thought was, well, he murdered his wife. That was somebody he loved. And initially my thoughts were just that, well, he was a terrible person, right, for doing that. But I had to now start thinking, were there other factors that could have induced it, that it meant he lost control. But he had control over whether to use drugs or not to use drugs. Again, alcohol consumption is drug use, right? It's drug abuse. And especially having a gun, he made the conscious decision of buying a gun, knowing his loved ones were around, his family, his wife, they were around. And so when you abuse drugs, and then the combination of having firearms, within in proximity, right, of your loved ones, then you're subjecting them to being killed. Without a doubt, these drugs cause people to act crazy, right? But you have control over, well, are you going to use the drugs or not, and allow yourself to go crazy and potentially harm your loved one or any member of society. Um, it's been in the news. Something uh, that's been swept under the rug or been muted is the recent information of a website preponderantly visited by Americans, with as many as 62 million visits, right, of a rape academy where uh, people are taught and encouraged on how to drug women, drug people, and then rape them. This is the America we're living in today, right? And people do get drugged, right? I've been drugged. I've known a friend who was drugged. She told me. I didn't know I would be drugged as well. The incident I've been talking about, I was drugged, and I've never felt the way I felt prior to that. I've never felt the way I felt after that. I told a friend. I told a friend. I wrote it down that I'd been drugged, and those who were responsible, Montgomery County Police was in part responsible because when I was reporting this to the police, they wanted to dismiss it and brush it off. That was the way they responded. Montgomery County Police and GDWRA and the Navy, uh, they had something to do with my being drugged. And these are, the idea is to disorient the victim. And I've suffered from a it's an assault. It's attempted murder when you drug someone. It depends on the state. And as I was saying, there's actually an active academy in which Americans share insights, share narratives, techniques, tactics on how to drug people and rape them. These are sick times, and uh, we need to be very careful what's going on, the sort of people we allow into positions of authority. They can't be people who use drugs. They can't be people who use alcohol. Um, and America needs to clamp down more severely, right, on people who uh, drug, uh, you know, drug their victims, vulnerable Americans. My name is Oloro Timiosha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.